So everybody, you should be seeing my slides now. It says the guest speaker series. This is number 2 in this really interesting and exciting thing that we've been doing. If you know anything about Turpin Communication and what we've been doing since the pandemic hit, we have been hosting a lot of public webinars to help people just get through the craziness and the challenges of communicating in this whole new way that we've been forced into. And now that even now, when things are starting to get back to some form of normal, we're never going to go back to the way things were. So we've been doing these webinars, and we're going to continue doing them until nobody wants to attend them anymore. What that means, we need to come up with new content from time to time. And one of the things we decided to do was to introduce our network to people who are somewhat adjacent to the work that we do. So that's the spirit of today's session. If you don't know who I am, I'm Greg. I am the EVP of Learning and Business Development here at Turpin. And with me today, we've got Dale Ludwig, our president and founder.
Hello.
And we also have Kevin Vogelsang. He's our operations manager, and he's going to be taking care of us today as the host of the session to make sure that we're having a favorable video and audio experience. So today, we're talking with Kelly L. Knowles about standing out while standing in 5 strategies to differentiate yourself with authenticity and integrity. And one of the things that she's going to be talking about, which I think is so interesting, is about first generation professionals. And depending on how you define that, and Kelly is going to define it here in a few minutes, but depending on how you define it, I am, believe it or not, a first generation professional myself. My father was an engineer, but he didn't go to school for that. That was back in the day when you could become an engineer without any formal training. My mom was a teacher with advanced degrees, but even she wasn't in the professional world. So I fall into this bucket, and I'm really interested to hear what Kelly has to say about helping folks who might be experiencing a little bit of imposter syndrome actually find their voice so that they can be so that they can meet their potential. Before we get to that, though, I want to talk a little bit about our business so that you understand the angle of which we are coming from today. So Turpin Communication, we are communication and consultants and trainers. We really help people communicate more effectively and efficiently in business situations. So that can apply to presenters, meeting facilitators, and trainers. And Dale and I have co-authored a handful of books and contributed to even more books than what you can see here on the screen over the years. And we might want to talk about some of that work as we progress in today's session. But what I want you to really think about right now is, how does Kelly's content connect with ours, which is about authenticity and career development? So a little bit of housekeeping. We do encourage interaction. Kelly is very adept at managing interruptions and questions, comments. So you can do that by interrupting us, by taking yourself off mute. You can drop it into chat, and you can also raise a hand either physically or virtually. We'll make sure that we monitor everything to make sure that your voice is heard when you want to chime in. And if you are able to, we would ask that you have your camera on, because as you can see here, if you don't have your camera on, it's a little bit like you're in the room, but you're standing in the corner with your back to us. Now, I recognize that this is a public session, and maybe you don't want to invite us into your home, your bedroom, or even into your office. That's perfectly fine. But from someone who speaks a lot virtually, I can tell you it is way more fun for us when we can talk with people that we can actually see rather than just those names on the screen. All right, we'll also ask you to eliminate any distractions so that you can actually be in this conversation with us today. And now, without further ado, I do want to introduce you to our guest speaker today, Kelly. You know, it's interesting because, Kelly, you are here today because of practicing some of the skills and techniques that you are going to introduce us to today. You know, I think about how visible you have been when we have been talking, you know, in these webinars, and it really made us take notice. And in fact, you and I have had several professional conversations over the last few years, which has led us to today. So I'm going to stop talking and turn things over to you so you can share with us about standing in while standing out, standing out while standing in.
Awesome. Thank you. Give me a couple seconds, and I want to share my screen with you all. And if I've done my job right. You all can hear me as well as see my PowerPoint. How we doing?
We can.
Got it.
Awesome. Very good. I am beyond excited about being here today. I have been restless this week because the opportunity to be here is just a big deal to me personally. As Greg said, I have been a super fan since discovering Turpin Communications a few years ago. Not a stalker, I want to make that distinction, but I have been a super fan and I've shared a lot of their content. I attend their sessions more than once when my schedule allows, because what I have found is I want you to think about in the last few years how many hybrid webinars, how many virtual webinars you've been on. And then I'm going to ask you, how many of those have you walked away going, I can use this today? This works. This is real. And that's how I feel about what Turpin puts out. And I hope that when you leave today, you're going to have that same feeling. That's my goal for you. This is about you. This is about providing content that I've done research on, that I have lived. But my goal at the end of the day is that why bother? It's important to me that you've taken this time, you walk away with something you can use. So that's the goal today. We'll see if we get there. And the agenda in brief, I like to do what I call the D3 approach. It's how I do presentations. It's often how I coach clients and do training classes in my full-time gig. But we're going to discover, we're going to develop, and then we're going to dig in. And what does that look like for us today? The discover is that fast 5 strategies to stand out. Now, we're going to constantly be tying that in with an understanding of FGPs, first generation professionals, and their impact in your organization. Also, think about this the flip way, how you can impact your organization if you are an FGP. And then finally, we're going to start by learning your primary driving for motive. But if you know me, you know I always have to start with a story because I think stories share truths and they engage us. And I'm going to start with this story. So, a long time ago, there was a young woman in her very first corporate job, and she was living in cubicle land and she was miserable. So she was cruising, and I have to tell you, it was long enough that I cannot remember if I found this card myself or if someone gave it to me. And I went through all my memory boxes, and then my husband laughed at me because I was crying. It was kind of silly. But the bottom line is, I had this card that I had, and it shows this picture of a young woman. Her hair's half done, her eyelashes are weird. She had a run in her nylons. Now, forgive me for that. I came from a generation where you went to work wearing pantyhose. Thank God that has changed. And this woman has a run in her hose. Her desk is a mess. And then this is the caption on the card: I shaved my legs for this. Even if you don't shave your legs, I bet you might be able to relate. And I remember this was a job that was not a good fit. But here's what happened, y'all. My boss came into my cubicle and he said, come here. And he called me in his office and he said, look, is this how you really want to be known? And what he was talking about was, hey, Kel, you're standing out, but is this how you want to stand out? It was a good lesson. It was a hard lesson. It may have taken me a while to take that card down, but I understood what he was saying to me. And it was the first time I had started to get just a smidge in a way of some professional coaching because I was standing out. The question is, was I doing it the way that I wanted to? I have another little story about Steve, that's who we'll call him later. It makes me think about this great quote by Maya Angelou that says, I did then what I knew how to do. Now that I know better, I do better. And that is something I strive to do every day. Can I learn something new? Can I do something better? Don't always win that day, but I love this quote. So we're going to start with discover. Kelly, what are these fast 5? And we'll dive into these a little bit on each one of them, but I want to give you some thoughts around what are the ways that you can stand out while also standing in for another. And the premise that I want to present here is this is not an either or. A lot of us are in careers where we're still moving forward. I changed jobs a year ago. I'm doing my best to move forward. And then we're also standing in for others. We're helping to develop others. So this isn't an either or proposition, y'all. This is a both and, in my opinion. So the first one is that you're a great remote communicator. And please forgive my allergies. What do I mean when I say remote? Kelly, why did you put remote in there? Think about our world today. We are literally doing all the things. We are in person, we are hybrid, we're fully virtual. Remote communication is very, very different. If I'm doing my job right today, you feel like I'm looking right at you most of the time. I'm not looking at the pictures over here on my screen. I've worked and trained to focus on the camera so that I can build engagement with you. Remote communication is different. High standards of personal accountability, that speaks for itself, but I've got some specific ideas around that for you. Self promotion in a non threatening way. Am I the only one that has attempted the, what is it called, the humble brag on LinkedIn or in other areas? And so I want to give you some tangible, tactical ways that you can self promote in a way that feels authentic. I love that Greg brought that up earlier. I've lived long enough to know that if I'm not living authentically with a filter, I have to have a filter. But if I'm not living authentically, I'm not a happy gal. And so that's why I want to talk a little bit about how can you self-promote in a non-threatening way. And what I probably ought to put in there is an authentic way as well. I think you stand out by developing others. This is a call of my heart. You'll hear it when I talk about this with you. And then finally, self-awareness. And that's where we're going to talk about this driving core motive. When we think about being a great remote communicator, these are four items that I want to call out for us today, and we'll take a short dive into each one of them. Communication, visibility, emotional agility. This may be something if you've been following Susan and David, especially on LinkedIn, and then social excellence. Communication, visibility, emotional agility, and social excellence. A piece about communication. I love this. The bottom line up front. You hear me say this a lot if you have an interaction with me, and I'm very thrilled to see some familiar faces today. It's that why bother? What's our end goal? Now, think about this when you're communicating. You're about to give a major presentation to a group of C suite or executives or just the level above, and they get called out of the room, or they get distracted by a Teams call, or they get some other thing is going on. Their assistant comes in and has them leave the room. How far did you get in the message that you wanted to present? So the concept here, and if you go and Google it, you'll find a lot of origins for where this came from. Some people say it's a military strategy. Some people say that it's their strategy. The piece that I got from was a Gary Gennard, who I really like his presentation topics. But it's that bottom line up front. Give the bottom line at the beginning. Give the bullet points. Then, if that person has to leave, if a distraction happens, we all have them. How many times have we checked things just in the last few minutes? Then that person has at least heard the main points. You can go further into your presentation with the detail. I actually had someone, she graduated, went into a healthcare company, and we had been working together on presentations. And I said, do this. It was really hard for her. She said, Kelly, I want to give the details. I said, I'm not telling you not to give the details. I'm not telling you to do the crudely put CYA. I'm saying give the bottom line, the quick points up front. Back in the day, we called that the executive summary if you were doing a report. And I really want to encourage you to try this. It's a good skill. And she actually emailed me one day and she said it worked. She said, we had decided to try this for a group of C suites we were presenting our program to, and almost all of them got called out to something else. We at least got the main point across. That was exciting to me. So we've got bottom line up front. Now, what is this thing, Kelly, you talk about emotional agility? There's a lot of words. I worked really hard to remove that extra wording in my PowerPoints, but I wanted you to see this. This is something Susan David writes about. Emotional agility. What does this mean? It means how do we navigate twists and turns? How do we provide clarity and an open mind in the midst of all the challenges? What I love about this is that she doesn't say ignore your feelings, ignore your emotions. It's how you work within them. You'll notice that I put myself out there as an inner leadership coach. Why? Because at the end of the day, no matter who I'm working with, whether I'm doing a training class at the law firm where I work, whether I'm coaching, whether I'm facilitating, at the end of the day, it's the individual that has to take the action. It's the individual that has to find the do. I can't do for them. I can help, I can encourage, I can inspire, I can help with tools. But that emotional agility, that inner leadership is a skill set. It's a tool to put in your toolbox. And I continue to read about this because I think it's interesting, especially given the external world that we're living in. No matter what side of the fence you sit on, we're being bombarded. I told myself this morning, you're about to take your social media break again. I do that a couple times a year. I think I'm going to do that for April because I'm just letting myself get bombarded by externals, which is moving me away from my internal goals. Does that make sense? So that's that emotional agility. Happy to hear any thoughts if anybody has any. All of these things, as we're talking about them in terms of remote communication, social excellence, visibility, it's aspirational. If we're going to continue to growing as individuals, you're on this call, this tells me you're interested in growing, then we continue to look at this from an aspirational point of view. It's the long game, y'all. And so what does that mean, Kelly? It's how we're constantly working to be generous and curious and positive, open to the possibilities. We want to intentionally connect. Excuse me. I have been able to intentionally connect with Turpin. A few years ago, I saw what they were putting out. I said, this isn't the usual fluff that I'm seeing in so many spaces. Game on, I'm in. And I wanted to intentionally connect. It's been worth it. And I have learned and gained so much. And I'm just thrilled to be here with you all today, engaging in deep, meaningful conversation. Now, we have to have boundaries. We're going to talk about that in a moment when we look at accountability, but real conversation. It's something I believe everybody is built for community. And so this helps you to kind of think about, what do I aspire to? What kind of meaningful conversation is important to me? And then acting in that responsible, respectable manner with expectations of others. You know, I was saying earlier in our kind of chit chat before starting the session today, I'm not an enabler. And I think it's because I want people to know they can grow, they can move forward into their greatness, and I can help, but I want us to have expectations of each other. So that's one, a great remote communicator. Keep that remote in your mind. Then we're going to talk about personal accountability, inner leadership. I love this concept of a personal board of directors. I'm curious, hand raised, etc. How many of you all have a personal board of directors? There's someone on this session today I know has one because she's written about it and I've read about it. This is a cool concept because when we think about being accountable, sometimes we need our people. I will tell you a story, and this has just happened within the last few months. I have a person that I coach. He's become a good friend. He developed in my business logo. He did all of the original illustrations for my book. He is beyond talented, and he works a regular job while he's building his side business and building it into a real business. He was approached by an influencer a few months ago who said, "Tell me about yourself." And the next thing you know, this guy contacts him. He says, "Do you have Cash App? Do you have Venmo? Do you have all those things?" And he said, "Well, I've got one thing, but not the other." He said, "Get them." So we're on our call. We talk once a month. The other days, and I said, "How you been? What's going on?" And he said, "Let me tell you what happened." And it hit me in the heart. It hit me in all the real places, y'all. He said, "Let me tell you what happened. Over $25,000 has been sent to him to seed his business." How amazing is that? That's the power of community for one. And I just sat there and we're on a Zoom call. I said, "I'm about to weep." I said, "Get ready. I'm about to get my tissues out." Now, here's what he's done next when we had our next call. He said, "I'm rebuilding my board of directors." He said, "I'm his coach. He is looking for somebody to help him with the finances because he wants to be a good steward of what he just got blessed with." And so I put him in contact with a guy who I've worked with on budgeting before. He's putting together his marketing people. He's putting together someone to help him more with his health. Do you see where I'm going here? This is the way that he's going to move into his greatness. And he is a phenomenal talent. It has nothing to do with not having the talent. It has to do with what he does to get that talent out to the world. And then professional boundaries. So I got to tell you about Steve again. That very same boss, not long after I started there, there was a fund that went around for a gift for his birthday. And this is a little bit PG. It was a fund to have a stripper come into the office for his birthday. That was against my personal boundaries. And I chose not to contribute to that fund. It was not a fun time for me. I was the only one in the office that didn't give money. I'm a new college student. I'd gotten my first job finally after coming out of a really bad recession. I'm barely making rent. It was against my personal values, but it was also against my funding values, to be honest. And to me, that crossed all boundaries. And it changed my view of him. It changed how I looked at him as a leader. So when we think about accountability, we go in a lot of places. I love what Gary Vaynerchuk talks about. He's very active in social media about opportunities just by being a good person and what you may lose by being a bad person. Any thoughts or comments around accountability, y'all?
Kelly, this is Greg. I have a few thoughts, but I'm going to reserve them for our Q&A, our interview
Okay.
that we're going to do a little bit later. But you definitely are seeding lots. I've got a whole list of things I want to talk about, actually.
Okay. Good, good.
Kelly, what strikes me is that I often think of accountability as an external influence. And I think what you're really talking about is holding ourselves accountable to like hold that line, especially when personal values or boundaries are pushed.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Dina. And that's not always easy. Not always easy. I sent out an email to a number of people when I was talking about this topic a few months ago. And these are real quotes from people that I know when I said, what does accountability mean to you? And I just put it out on my Facebook group. And so these are real quotes around accountability. And I thought they were insightful. Don't expect others to give 100%, 110 and not hold yourself to the same standard. And this one was a little tough, but I felt like I needed to put it out there. Be willing to get in the trenches. I've had too many bosses say, team, you're the best. Sorry you have to work late. I'll see you in the morning, but I might be late. And that has happened to me personally. And then the last one, and I love the way this was put out because it was talking about just doing the right thing. When we think about accountability, y'all, we're not perfect. I continue to be reminded how I fall from that standard. But one of the things that I think we can all strive to do is be consistent. I think so often, especially if we're in a leadership role, we can get a little grace. People might give us some grace. Maybe they'll bend a little bit for us if they know that we're pretty consistent with what we do. If we are consistent in how we present the policies, if we are consistent in showing up on time, whatever that may be, then when we have one of those days where we're just not hitting the mark, I think people can be a lot more forgiving. And so I really liked that this person brought in, day out, that consistency concept, and then it covering our deficiencies because I know I have blind spots. I know deficiencies, and then I know there are some that I don't realize I have. And integrity, that's where we get into, we want to do these things with integrity. So that is where we tie in our third one is this concept of integrity. And that is how do you do self-promotion in a non-threatening way? So I threw out some ideas and I've got some specific examples for you. The power of story. That is something somebody told me a few years ago, my goodness, you're a storyteller. And I had to kind of think about that. Am I being told a good thing or a bad thing? And maybe it depends on the person. Optimizing LinkedIn, that particular platform has exploded the last 3 years. It's been fascinating to see what's gone on with LinkedIn the last few years. And then a focus on company is another way you can promote. Greg and I have talked a little bit about our mutual appreciation society. And then the last one is creating personal space with a leader. But I want to start with the power of story and tying that in with optimizing LinkedIn. So Becky Daniels, and I don't expect you to be able to read all the teeny tiny. Becky Daniels is a bookkeeper and an accountant here in Tennessee for companies and entrepreneurs and authors all over the country. And I don't know where Becky and I found each other, but it was probably a webinar. And we just started to connect. And then we had a call together, and it just kept going from there. And Becky doesn't go on LinkedIn and say, please hire me as your bookkeeper. Please let me be your accountant. She tells stories that tie into her values and how she represents her business. So this story is the story of a little girl who lost her Mickey Mouse balloon. How many of us have been somewhere with a child with a balloon? If you don't hog tie that balloon to their hand somehow, guess what? The balloon is going to find its way in the air. And that's what this story does. At the end of the story, it says, the big sister spoke up. Look, Mickey just wanted to be with Minnie. She saved the day. The husband and wife are looking at each other, and one of them says to the other, do something. Y'all have to pause. If any of you are in a relationship, I know my husband and I have done this to each other. We have had those moments in life where there was raising children or something was not working right. And we looked at the other one and went, do something. And a girlfriend of mine, when she had her husband asked her, hey, what do you want me to do? And she said, assess the situation and act accordingly. And I just love that phrase, and I use it all the time. And this is what that little girl did in this story. But here's the power of this, y'all. Look at the bigger font. If you try, and this is what she wrote at the end. So the story is compelling. You're drawn in. I can't help but read her stories on LinkedIn. Then she says, if you can try, you can see a different purpose or narrative in what is happening before you. And then she builds her business in a very unassuming, positive, confident, comfortable way. I always want my clients to walk away with what? A feeling of calm because they have a plan to get them where they want to go. When I grow up and I need a really good bookkeeper, Becky's my girl because she's bought me. I'm bought in. In our conversations together, kind of going back to that meaningful connection, I've discovered she lives just a few miles down the road from my mother in East Tennessee. Sidebar, I was telling her, I just can't get my mother to do all the things that she needs to do to find the right person to mow her lawn. Becky's husband is a school teacher, so he looks for things in the summer. Win-win, y'all. And now that gets my mother taken care of because for some reason, she thinks 2.5 hours away, I can find her somebody to mow the lawn. There we go. I did. So as we think through the power of story, here's another one. LinkedIn, focus on company. So Leah Hayes is somebody who has a social connection. I used to work with her that she could literally probably call anybody on the planet and get what she wants. She's just that connected. Here's what I love about what she does on LinkedIn. She is a commercial account manager for Culligan Water. She's in sales, y'all, but she doesn't go on LinkedIn and go, here's our special this week, or please buy from me. She does fun things. And so I love this quote, our water is better than yours. It's kind of unassuming, it's jolly, and she focuses on her company. Guess what? That brings interest in her as well. So I wanted to give you those two very tactical examples of how you can continue to self-promote in a non-threatening way. I mentioned a mutual appreciation society. One of the things that I love is when organizations come together and we realize, hey, you're good, I'm good, let's work together and share our network or share stories about each other. Many years ago, I had a professional organizing business and I felt very alone. It was a new field. So I literally got out the old school phone book because that's what we had at the time. I wrote a letter to every organizer in the state of Tennessee and said, would you all like to get together? Now we're technically competitors. We were all organizing, but we found we were better together. And that group became the Middle Tennessee Professional Organizers and eventually became part of the National Association of Professional Organizers, if you're familiar with them. We ended up reaching out to each other when sometimes we had a task too big or a client that we knew we couldn't serve. I'm not qualified at the time and not today to help people that deal with the hoarding. It's a disease, it's a whole mental thing. And we had organizers that had that background that knew how to work with people who were struggling with hoarding. Anytime I came across that as a potential client, I rang them up because at the end of the day, it served my business because I was making the person happy and it served their business.
Kelly, I can't help but interrupt you. I tried to be silent, but you know me well enough to know that I just can't. But this mutual appreciation society, I think a lot of people don't fully understand the impact that it can have. As I look across the people who are attending today, there are members of my mutual appreciation society right here. I'm looking at a couple. I won't embarrass you by calling you out, but a couple of us go back many, many years. And how do you meet these people? Well, you get involved, you network, you have conversations with people, you step out of your comfort zone to be able to do that. And at one point, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, we actually here at Turpin, we were able to quantify how much money we had made over a period of time based on those relationships that we had made organically. We don't go, you don't network and say, hey, hire me, right? You have to do it in another way. People then like you, and then the business grows from there. And I think that is something that a lot of people really don't understand. And more importantly, we don't quite know how to do it remotely.
Mm.
Right? I mean, so many of our clients have said to us that over the last few years, the lack of ability to develop and nurture relationships has been really strained. And I'm wondering if you have anything additional to say about that.
I would offer that don't be afraid to try a phone call. When somebody you kind of feel like you're connecting with a little bit, reach out to them and say, I'd like to learn more. Respect their time. There have been some of those phone calls that I'm like, oh, I wish I'd never done that one. There are others, just like that call with Becky. It was a win. It was a great win. And I think that is one of the pieces that I would toss out there is even if being an extrovert, going, those you don't have to be a people person to be able to make these connections. And think about, you are going to get a feel for people sometimes that say, I'd like to get to know this person more. The other thing is that authenticity. If you can tell when somebody's trying to sell you, and that's the other piece that I always just want to be very cognizant of is, do I really want to get to know this person as a person? Then we'll see where it goes from there. Because again, I've had both calls. I've had those calls where, wow, this was great. And then I've had those calls where, somebody wants to sell you something. Most of my coaching clients have come as a result of somebody seeing me on something like this and sending them a message that says, can we talk? That's it. And then we go further. But it starts with that conversation, even if you don't feel like you're the best conversationalist. The other thing is there's so many organizations now that are meeting remotely. ATDs, for an example, the talent development group that's nationwide. I've been able to make connections on that over the last few years where I'm just now meeting those people in person. So I hope that's a couple of helpful kind of tactical ways to do that.
Yeah, for sure. And when you were talking about all of this, what popped into my head, because you mentioned the inauthenticity, like you can smell that a mile away.
Yeah.
These people on LinkedIn that they will connect with you because for whatever reason, and then like the very next minute after you click yes, they're trying to sell you on something. And I don't know, maybe it's because I have author and coach in my bio or in my, the about piece of LinkedIn, but everybody comes out of the woodwork to help me build my coaching business. And then I dig in a little bit deeper and they're talking about physical coaching, like hello, do I look like I'm that kind of coach? No, I don't.
It's so funny. Yeah, I mean, I do think it's a trust your instincts sometimes. And at the same time, don't hold yourself back. I think the interest in being open-minded and learning from others, being part of organizations where you may be stepping out of your comfort zone a little bit. I think that is something, the more you do it, you get that confidence in the do. But those LinkedIn ones, yeah, Greg, they're fun. We'll just leave it there.
Yeah.
Creating personal space with a leader. This is one that I just got to thinking about what's another way to kind of put yourself out there. And this is a way to self promote, again, authentically, but also develop. So a real example, just a few weeks ago, we were having leadership meetings for our IT group at the firm, and we were all exhausted. By the time Friday came along, our CIO said, I cannot stomach the idea of being in a lift again. And my brain just went ding, ding, ding. And did it cost me time and gas money and all of that? Absolutely. But you know what I said next? I'll give you a ride to the airport, because I thought that is 30 minutes of undivided time with our CIO. Game on. And it was such a great opportunity to get to talk with her and interact, to hear a little bit more about what her vision is for our department, because she's new and I'm new and it's a whirl right now. And when we got to the airport, I said, okay, where do you want me to drop you off? She said, I've got some time. If you want, why don't you pull over here in the cell phone waiting lot and we'll talk a little more. That was worth every bit of gas, an extra 45 minutes to be home, etc. It gave me face time with a senior leader in my organization. That's rare. And so when you can create that personal space with the leader, do it. And if you can provide yourself those one-on-one meetings, I have a new boss and she and I have started those one-on-one meetings. It's an opportunity for you to present yourself, to present your progress, to ask for feedback. It's not this rumor mill, or you get to share your actual knowledge of subject matter and you get direct feedback. What I thought was interesting in this conversation with her was I said, thank you so much. I always learn from you. I want to be coachable. And the best thing that I thought came out of that was a couple of just tangible things for me to think about as we're in the middle of this whirl. But she also said this to me. She said, I learned from you too. Don't forget that. I'm here to learn also. Gift. There was reciprocity. And that builds those relationships. So if you feel that imposter syndrome, this is a real thing. And I'll talk about that a little bit more, but I do want to pause and talk about it now. Because when you're thinking about being with a leader, when you're thinking about being with a senior person, there is, depending on your background and your experience, you could get nervous. You may not be sure how to fill in the blank. And then imposter syndrome loves to come in and say, how you doing? What do you think you're doing? You're just her chauffeur today. What I want to offer is, as I've looked at imposter syndrome, it is not a gender thing, by the way. I have coached guys who deal with this at such a level, it's not even funny. So this isn't a woman thing, in my opinion. I want to say that delicately, but I think often we go that one direction. I've also learned that imposter syndrome means you're doing something, y'all. You're doing something. If you were in your comfortable space, hanging out, eating your pizza and watching your favorite show, no shame against that. I've got a couple of those. But if you're pushing yourself, if you're stretching and growing, imposter syndrome is going to be there because you're in an uncomfortable space. As you continue to develop and lead, imposter syndrome may come back. You think you're doing good, and then all of a sudden it comes back and says, hey, remember me? It's because you're moving forward. You may be moving up. I have a coaching program I put together for 20 and 30 somethings, and there's a whole session I talk about this imposter syndrome. And one of the phrases I use is new levels, new devils, because as you move up, you're going to encounter experiences you haven't had before. So trust yourself. Go get the tools. I think everybody needs a coach, and give yourself that time. And then if you are that person, I'm curious if you go back in conversations you've had and repeat them on a hamster wheel afterwards. Anybody else do that? You replay that conversation in your head again and again. There's a guy named John Acuff a few years ago. He wrote a book, and I've actually sent it to clients, called Soundtracks. And what he's saying is, what are those soundtracks playing in your mind? And I have to remind myself of that. Am I on the hamster wheel? And I'm not going to do it perfect. So when we think about imposter syndrome, pause yourself and allow yourself to think about what's happening here. Is it because I'm learning a new skill? Is it because I'm learning a new way to converse? We didn't learn how to tie our shoes overnight. I know I didn't. My mother was right-handed and I was left-handed. It was an experience. So give yourself some grace around that. We'll keep talking about imposter syndrome, but I wanted to pause here, especially because some people would have been terrified to drive their CIO. And I decided to go for it. Developing others. It's another way to stand out, but also stand in. Keep this in mind. I love this sign. I saw it somewhere a couple of years ago and I thought, that's me. And then somebody sent it to me in a text and said, I thought of you when I saw this today. What a gift, because it's true. It is, to me, the greatest thing that I get to do. When I get an email from somebody, I literally got one a few days ago, was headed to lunch, and I almost was the crying thing, y'all. I'm sorry it keeps coming up, but I'm at that age where I cry. But I mean, I got this email and it literally in the subject line said, because of you. She had heard me speak back in 2020 when the pandemic first hit in an alumni webinar, reached out to me. We ended up coaching. She's really done some phenomenal things in her career. She got to thinking about that the other day and said, oh, wow, and sent me this email with that subject line, because of you. That's a win. If I get nothing else done, I feel like I won. It's so fun to develop people. Now, this is where I do believe that as you're a new leader, if you're in new roles, you might get in your own way here. So hear me with the respect and love that I'm putting this out. Often, because we are insecure about our role, we choose not to develop others. And that's a real, because maybe what if they jump ahead? What if they do better? And my answer is, what if? That's the exciting part, is if I get a chance to develop someone, they switch companies and move into the next level and the next level. What an exciting thing to get to watch. But I do think that when people are more insecure about their roles, this is a place that can become a roadblock for them. So if this is something, think about this. If this is something that you're struggling with, what I believe is when you're developing somebody, you're leaving a legacy. The right people are going to remember. You're going to remember. And then let me tie this in with what's in it for you. Well, why bother? Because developing others develops you. Turpin does a great session on feedback. Giving feedback is not easy. I mentioned Toastmasters. Was part of Toastmasters for several years. Part of the Toastmasters organization, if you get in a good club, is you learn how to give speech evaluation feedback. The right people that can give the right feedback make you better. And guess what? Learning how to give feedback does what? Makes you better. So developing others develops you. There is a win in it for you too. I'd love to say it's all altruistic, but if we're going to be real humans, there's a win in there for you as well. Career advancement. I do want to tie this in because we're about to move into some discussion around first generation professionals. Career advancement ultimately is our responsibility. Yet we can play such a valuable role, y'all. We can stand in for people on a lot of different levels and help support and guide others. Some of these are some examples, and I keep tying in these stories for a reason. Sponsoring someone. Someone last year put me in contact with an organization. The next thing I knew, I was co-presenting with the dean of a medical school to a group of women. That was a win. She sponsored me. I was able to be part of one meeting. That got me into another, and so on. Mentorship. We can mentor people and be mentored even if we don't know them. I'm curious, and please put it in the chat because I want to go back and read the chat later. If any of you have ever heard of Jim Rohn, R-O-H-N, Jim Rohn. Jim Rohn has been gone from this earth for years. I'm not going to tell you when I just discovered him because it's embarrassing. He is somebody, obviously I probably won't meet him, and he never met me. He's a mentor to me. When I listen to Jim Rohn material, it's dated, but it's timeless. And I get inspired and I get encouraged and I learn tools. I sat at a kind of a retreat center last year, and all the grandkids and the husband were off fishing. And I sat out there with my cup of coffee and literally went through what he called his audio tape that's now on Audible to setting goals. He is somebody that I would consider a mentor. So you don't have to know that person. Encouraging self-reflection. Sometimes I need that. That boss, that first job out of college, that's what he did for me with that card on my cubicle. He didn't tell me to take it down. He encouraged my own self-reflection. And then providing opportunities. I've given these examples, access, introducing people, and so on. All of this, it's important that we have self-awareness. So we'll tease this for a moment because I want to talk about a personality profile at the end of our time together. But self-awareness also helps you to do what? Stand out and also stand in for others. So how do we develop and look at this from the perspective of a first-generation professional? Now, those of you who are math-minded, you may say, well, 13% isn't a much. This is a statistic that is from, I think, Scholarship America, where it talks about first-generation college seniors being less likely to have done any professional networking. In my view, 13% is too many that haven't. When I graduated from college, I did not know what professional networking was. Not a clue, y'all. And I graduated during recession. I was going to every career fair I could. At one point, I cracked my ankle in Atlanta, Georgia, had to go to another interview like that. And the guy immediately told me he hated my university and he looked at my ankle. I knew I wasn't going to get that job. And so having these experiences, if you are someone who identifies as a first generation professional or you're working with first generation professionals, I think this is really, really important. Here is a picture of me. And I couldn't find any pictures of my college graduation. So this is when I went back and got my master's. I was told in high school that I wasn't smart enough for college. I come from a working class background, scored very low on a pre-SAT, and the guidance counselor said to me, "You're not going to college, are you?" Well, that had been the aspiration of my parents for years. I was naturally kind of a smart kid, even though I'm still very average. I loved school. And that was immediately what was happening in my household. You're going to college, you're college material. And yet, boy, I'm so glad I didn't listen to that guidance counselor. Was college easy for me? Absolutely not. I had to work hard. Was graduate school easy? Even harder. But I'm so glad I didn't listen. And when we think about, well, Kelly, what is a first generation professional? Here's an official definition. And colleges are really keying in on this, y'all. Law schools are starting to pay a lot of attention to this because it's impacting their enrollments, it's impacting their hiring, all kinds of things. And I want to pause here. My father was a welder and an electrician, and that is a trade that I really am proud of that he was part of that. I think the trades are underrated. My brother's an electrician. I will have to live in his basement if my 401k goes any further in the tank. So I want to not dishonor trades while we're talking about this conversation. The flip side of it is I think this first generation professional thing is very real and it's impacting our organizations. It's impacting us also because we have so many generations in the workforce. We have 75-year-olds working with 25-year-olds. Think about what's happened in 50 years, in 60 years. So we've got lots of different perspectives coming in. The official definition, someone who has been the first in their immediate family to obtain a 4-year college degree and or obtain a higher level professional position than what was held by either parent. My mother started working part-time at Ace Hardware when I was 10 years old. Over 40 years later, she was the first female manager they had as a store manager in East Tennessee. And she's 75 now and just works when she wants. God bless her. She'll come in, she'll help open a store, and then she'll just go do whatever she wants. So I came from that working class background. It is different. There is a different set of phrases. There's a different vocabulary and even approach to work. My father asked me when I took my first job out of college, "What are you making on the hour?" I had absolutely no idea. I said, "Daddy, this is my salary." But he said, "What are you making on the hour?" And then when I worked over 40 hours, as most of us in these professions do, he said, "Do you get overtime for that? Why aren't you getting time and a half?" It's a different vocabulary, y'all. If you're a first generation professional or you're working with first generation professionals, know this, it feels often like you're swimming upstream. Going back to that imposter syndrome, going back to so many scenarios. I have read etiquette books. I follow etiquette influencers on Instagram. Etiquette is coming back, believe it or not. There is a young woman, her Instagram is Old Soul Etiquette. And she is delightful. I actually attended one of her $25 how to dine well sessions one day on Zoom. My husband was not pleased when I said, "You're doing this with me." He said, "No, I'm not." I said, "We'll just keep you off camera." But one of the things I always struggled with was which glass is mine at an event. And I shared this with someone. I allowed myself to be vulnerable a few years ago. I said, "This is embarrassing that I can never remember this." And so I hope I'm not making any inappropriate gestures because I want to be mindful of cultural differences. But she held up her hand. Your right hand, if you hold your right hand up, it does what? A D. If you hold your left hand up, it creates a B. Bread, drink. Drink. I've not forgotten since. Just that little visual made my day. And it's been something I've used going forward. Now, for some of you, you all may say, "I've done that since I was little." It was part of your upbringing, it was part of your experience. First generation professionals sometimes don't know how to explain their career aspirations to people. If you ask my mother today, "What does Kelly do for a living?" she's going to say she talks a lot and helps people with their computers. Now, that's not a diss on mom, but that is how she describes me because she doesn't have context for what does a staff person who works in IT, who does training, do in a law firm. Her mind in terms of thinking about lawyers may be a little bit different. When I did other jobs, that was always, "What is it you do? What are you doing? I'm proud of you." And that was always the first, the next phrase, "I'm proud of you. What do you do?" So it's something just to be cognizant of. And they may not always know how to relate. I'll give one more example. I was asked last year to do strategic planning for the leadership team for a private school here in Nashville. The entire leadership team is women. And as I started looking through their roles and looking at the website, I came across terms I didn't know. What were those terms? Upper school and lower school. Y'all, I went to public school. I had no idea what those terms meant. And I thought, if I'm going to do a good job for this client, I better get some research in. I better start working because the upper school leadership and the lower school leadership, I needed to understand what those terms were because that wasn't a background that I had experience in. Is this making sense? Are y'all connecting to this okay? Okay.
Kelly, you definitely are connecting with me when you talk about, you don't know the language or being denigrated for whatever. I remember growing up, and I mentioned earlier that I'm a first generation professional. The notion of someone having a desk job in my family was like, "Oh, how could you possibly have a desk job? How boring that must be. I need to be out in the wilderness, like chopping stuff," right? And it took me a long time to get over feeling bad about having a desk job, for sure.
Yeah, thank you for that. I live in both worlds. My husband is a cabinet maker. He built what you see behind me. It's how we met. I needed an entertainment center. And there you go. I mean, that's what happens. 19
That's
years
awesome.
later, he's still tolerating me. But those are, we all maybe live in a combination of those worlds, but there are different perceptions completely around that. So if we go back to our fast five, great remote communicator, personal accountability, self promotion, developing others, having that self awareness. These are things that tie in for first generation professionals, whether you're standing out as one or standing in for one. And I struggled with this image. It's actually from one of the articles that we're going to be sending out to you later. Is this personal responsibility? I was reviewing this with a buddy of mine in law school, and he is my ultimate proofreader. I don't know what I'm going to do when he finishes law school because I won't be able to afford him because he doesn't make me pay him now. I just find out when his exams are, and I send him a DoorDash because he's up in DC. But he has been such a gift. But when he saw this slide, he said, "I don't understand it." And so I wanted to draw this out a little bit because a lot of it is about, honestly, I know I sound like a little Sunday school girl, but letting your light shine. How do you let your light shine? How do you get out there who you are, what you're about, and get yourself noticed authentically with accountability and integrity and so on? But at the end of the day, it's my personal responsibility to seek out and do my professional development. There will be people that help me along the way. There will be people that influence me. There will be people that hate me, and I will learn from that. But it is my personal responsibility. even if I may not have had all the breaks, if that makes sense. Now, this was something taught to me, and I wanted to make sure to say this with kindness, but also that we don't sit and expect somebody else to move us. I hope that resonates in the respectful way that I gave it. So that visibility, for some people, oh, Kelly used the N word, networking, I hate it. It's okay. Find your people, find the areas for networking that are a fit for you. Confidence is in the do. If you've never networked, the first time is going to feel weird. You're going to have to think about what networking means to you. It's not just a business card saying, hey, buy from me. There's so many other elements of it. Mentorship. Maybe you can mentor someone who is younger than you or is at a different level while you're continuing to move forward. And then again, that professional development. One of the pieces from the last few years, and there's been a lot of ugly, is that professional development has become so much more accessible. Organizations, unless you're at a certain level, I haven't had in over 15 years an organization send me anywhere for training. It just money doesn't happen like it used to. I remember when I was in sales, they sent us to Hawaii and Scottsdale, Arizona, and what was the place I went to out in California? It was a very Ventura, California. That I couldn't tell you the last time I had an organization put me on a plane to go learn something. So these things are different now, but it's a lot more accessible. Audible is a great resource if you don't like reading books. The webinars that we have sessions like this, I get so much professional development from attending the Turpin communication sessions. It's something I intentionally try to make time in my schedule for. Being proactive at events. And Greg, I know I want to be cognizant of time as we're traveling through these last slides.
Oh, you're good. We've got
Okay.
another 30 minutes to banter back and forth and talk
Awesome.
in more detail about all this.
Good. Thank you. So can you be proactive? Can you represent your organization? Maybe you are not someone who's even been given business cards, or you don't have your name on the website. There are still ways that you can stand out. And this is one of them. I love reading. I started a book club at my previous firm, and it was anybody wanted to be a part of it. And then we took turns presenting whatever chapters we'd read for that month. That allowed me to continue to develop my presentation skills. But also, guess what? People who would have never, ever thought about speaking in front of a group did. The other thing that I was able to do was be part of a program where we had a school that served in an underserved part of the community. That was on my way to work. I live out in the suburbs. I don't live in the city. So I was able to stop by that school on my way to work and help tutor. The ability for children to understand what they read, whether they are first English speaking first or English as a second language, it's a real challenge in our culture today. And I'm seeing it with adults now. We put out a quick reference guide and people don't read it and they don't understand it. And it's been written very simply. So these are things where you can be proactive as part of your organization, and you are able to get noticed and interact with other levels. Greg and Dale said it was okay for me to self-promote me. That imposter syndrome thing is something I write about in my book. When I decided to go back to graduate school, I was working as a marketing assistant at the Chamber of Commerce. What a great experience that was. And a director came by and said to me, you're going to graduate school? And I just nodded and smiled, because even though I was raised by Midwestern parents and I've been here in the South since I was 7, I still have learned a little bit of the smiling thing and the ma'am and the sir. And so I just smiled, yes, ma'am. And yeah, I did. So that imposter syndrome, we all get it, and we may get it from people that it's unexpected. If you're moving up, and sometimes we don't all have supportive families. I know someone personally who got to go to college for free, and their mother told them it was a waste of their time. That was the immediate family. So we all have different influences. And I write a lot about this in my book. This book was started 25 years ago. I've had women and I've had some men from 75 all the way down to 18 read this and gain some insights, but imposter syndrome was one of them. And then also, how do you promote yourself? This book will never sell if I don't promote it. It's not just going to show up, somewhere and somebody says, yes, I'd like 1 million copies. That's not how it works. Unfortunately, it's not how it works. GoRick.com is another resource I want to give you before we start tying things up. This is a person who went to Harvard, first generation professional. If you do nothing, go and get his workplace jargon dictionary. Now, some of y'all will be like, I've heard these words my whole life. Some of you all will be, this is a whole new language. A few years ago, I was hearing a young professional I work with using the term level set, and I had not heard that term. And so guess what I did? I went and looked it up. And so all of these terms that we may or may not be familiar with, I love that he built this whole jargon dictionary, and you don't have to agree with it, but these words are being used. And there's a guy on Instagram that is actually, he's very funny. He wears pearls, he cracks me up, but he talks and does these conversations with all of this jargon, and it's good for a giggle. The piece that I want you to see is the learning I got from this infographic. So I just ripped it straight off LinkedIn. Is so often when you are newer in your career and you're trying to figure out how to stand out or stand in, sometimes we go towards these things called minor itches that we see on this little infographic, because they may be the areas we're most comfortable with, or they're areas where we can see ourselves being successful. But look at where you get recognition. Now, this is hard for me. It's something I'm still getting my arms around. Can you find pain points that are causing the stress to the people above you? That's something I try to focus on for the people that I report to. Where are their pain points and how can I help? I didn't say my pain points, by the way, which is easier said than done. Where are their pain points and how can I help? Also, where are problems that could derail an entire project or the entire team? Security is huge in law firms right now. Even if that's not my bent, I need to be engaged and paying attention in those meetings, because it's impacting how we train people. It's impacting how even what happens when the wrong link gets clicked. One wrong click in one email could take a whole firm down. So these are real reels, y'all. And I thought this was a helpful graphic, but I also wanted to promote, this guy does not know me. If you know him, I'd love an introduction, but he has a beautiful website. He does a really good job of telling his story, talking about his mom, talking about his success. And now I think he's a professor somewhere. So how do we dig in? This is something I will not go into the full experience of this, but I just want to give you, as an old boss of mine used to say, a nickel tour. So this is a personality profile that I came across several years ago in a personal level. I looked at my husband, I said, I'm a red, you're a white, and this explains everything. And Monday will be 19 years. So something somewhere seems to be working okay. But I love this personality profile because it gets down to how you are driven. There are so many qualified profiles out there that this is not an us versus them. But this is the one that I said, I want to take money out of personal savings and go and get certified. And I've taught this to hundreds. There are 4 driving core motives: power, intimacy, and I'm going to reframe that in a moment, peace, and fun. Some of you on the call have seen this. And power, these are people that are your action. They're going to get you from point A to point B. They're going to say things like, what's the end goal? Where are we headed? Now, natural tendencies are leadership and vision. I want to pause here. These personality profiles, in my opinion, are not identifiers of this is who you are. They are tools in your toolbox, particularly in my view, for communication. And are you saying, Kelly, that only people who are red or power can be leaders and visionaries? Absolutely not. Hear me. Natural tendencies. And because we are all individuals, not everybody's 100% red or 100% blue. We are real people, but these are some natural traits. I said I was going to reframe intimacy, and I want to reframe it to connection, because when we see the word intimacy, we think more physical, and really it's about connection. These are folks who are all about quality and service. They're actually really good at that meaningful conversation. They can read a room. They can help you if you tend to be tone deaf to what's going on with your people. They can often help you because they can feel the emotions. Now, I married a peacemaker. I want to go and fight, and he wants to say, wait, let's all make peace. It's been a good combination when we're being grown-ups. People who are this profile, a superpower is clarity and tolerance. And boy, we kind of need some of that. And then finally, fun. People who do the profile and they say, oh, I'm a yellow. No, this is exciting because yellows bring the fun. They live in the moment. They bring an enthusiasm and an optimism. I just finished doing this with the entire cabinet shop where my husband works. Y'all, this was an experience presenting something like this. It was all men, and it was all working class men who build cabinets and all the things for very, very high end clients. And so presenting color code to them, it was so much fun. I couldn't wait to get in there and do it. But we did it with the leadership first, and their president is a yellow. And his business in the midst of all of this chaos is thriving. It's a positive. One more slide regarding this, and then I've got a QR code if you'd like to take the free version, is going back to this communication piece. Reds and yellows tend to be quick in their communication. All right, why does this tie into standing out and standing in? Because as a red, if I'm working to help develop someone, I have to know a little bit about their style. Because if they are a blue, they may need more deliberate communication. They may need to take things in smaller bites. They may need to think about it a while. A blue needs to digest, and I'm coming in with 759,000 things. And they're like, I'll take one at a time, thank you. And I'm like, but there's still more. No, one at a time, thank you. And it's helping me help them and myself. Flip it to logic and emotion. Some of us just love and live from emotion. Some of us love and live from logic. Some of us are a fun little combination. So this helps you as you're thinking about how do you stand out as well as standing in. I am continually told, Kelly, you are too direct. It's a blind spot for me. So I'm constantly trying to be aware of this. This is a self-awareness. That's that fifth one on standing out by standing in, greater self-awareness. So one of the questions that I hope that we get to talk a little bit about is this standing out as we advance and standing in for each other. But I want to pause here and show this QR code. And if you've never done this, you open up your camera on your smartphone. It doesn't work for a flip phone. I know that there are still flip phones out there, so I will be happy to email you the link. But if you would like to use your camera, this will take you to the free version. I want to pause here. I hope you've picked up by now that I will not spam you, nor will I call you, nor will I email you 7 times a day. I'm not that person. We don't have time for that, y'all. So if you would like to have a further conversation, I would love to do that. But just know that this is not going to result in a lot of extra stuff in your inbox, in your world. I want to make sure that I respect professional boundaries. So I will pause here and see where we'd like to take it, Craig.
Yeah, well, thank you, Kelly. That was just a whole incredible hour worth of great stuff. I've got an entire page of notes here that I hope we have enough time to get to. But before we do that, I do want to call your attention to something, a question that was in chat. I couldn't find a good time to interrupt you, so now's as good enough time as any. But the question is, can you add more hints on what it means to encourage self-reflection?
Yes. If you are a natural advice giver, okay, I'm not going to make anybody fess up. I'm just going to say some of us might be that way. I think it is having a bit of self-control around that, if that makes sense. And when an experience happens, hear that person. It could be, how did you think that went? What are the things that you saw as successful about that? If we were looking at doing this again, what would you do differently? And being cognizant of how you're phrasing that. Maybe it depends on who you're with. Maybe not what would you do better, but maybe what would you do differently? And then also asking sometimes for feedback for yourself. Hey, is there anything that I could have done better to make that session a better experience for you? That allows them to maybe then sometimes people will say, oh, well, what about me? Because they want to talk about themselves. And those are just a few things. But it's taking that time to listen, before we start giving them the 5 steps to getting things fixed, if that
Hmm.
makes sense.
It really resonates with me. Dale and I talk, and the rest of our trainers, we talk a lot about, how do you give productive feedback to people? And one of the things that we always encourage when we're teaching this is ask the other person, how do you think that went? Or how are you feeling about that interaction or whatever it was? Because you have to take their temperature,
Yeah.
right? Where do they think that went great? And if that's the case, then and it didn't go great, then you know what you're dealing with. And the reverse of that is true as well. Yeah. Oh, golly. So, and anybody else, while I am asking questions and Kelly and I are talking here, feel free to drop into chat other questions that you might have or comments or what have you. I want to go back, Kelly, to one of the very first things that you mentioned, which was the I shaved my legs for this, and I can't remember if you actually used the term professional branding, but that's where my brain went, because so much of the work that we do is about helping people not only identify what is their intended brand, but then growing their self-awareness around how they're coming across to other people so that they can meet the goals that they've set for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is so incredibly important. And when we were going through your content the other day, you had brought up Suzanne Bates' work with the Bates organization and the book that she wrote, All the Leader You Can Be.
Yes.
It's a book that Dale and I, well, we're certified in that sort of stuff, and we've presented it at many of our webinars. How do you, first of all, what in the world is executive presence? And second of all, how do you achieve it? And it starts with professional branding. You have to identify how you want to be perceived in order to meet those goals. So it's really interesting that while it was a negative experience that you had, it has guided you, it seems, throughout your career to really think about how am I being perceived.
Oh, I could talk about that one for days. I have had people meet me that thought I was the biggest redneck they have ever met. I have had people that thought that I was some, genteel, high-end debutante. It's absolutely fascinating. And so one of the things that I want us to think about is also be cognizant of other people's perceptions and the background that they're bringing with them to whatever is going on. But we all have a brand. We could name celebrities right now, and you've got a brand. We could name a politician. We could name someone that we know, and they have a brand. Whether we know it or not, we all have a brand. I had a lady at church tell me Sunday, she said, "You just say it as it is, don't you?" And I thought, gosh, and I thought I was filtering. And so again, I thought the filter was on, but it's one of those where, for me, I grew up in East Tennessee, but I was raised by Midwestern parents. Both of my parents were no nonsense, say it as it is people. And so I picked up on a lot of that. And then you get into the professional world and you're like, oh, okay, I need to figure out how to hold this back or how to rephrase this. And I am very grateful for 2 parents that were beyond authentic. My friends loved my mom and dad. They were comfortable in our home. They much rather come to our house because they could be themselves. So that was a gift that they gave me, was that gift of authenticity. I had somebody say that to me the other day in my house. They said, "You have a home where I can be me." Now
Mm,
you still take your shoes off at the door because that's just how we do it. But I found that as a gift. Now the flip side of it is also being aware, okay, if I'm perceived as direct, if I've been told that I can be intimidating, then when I'm in those situations, where do I need to maybe soften my edges? Maybe where do I need to pull back when I'm really eager to drive forward? It goes back to that personality profile, which really was a game changer for me because it helped me understand sometimes some people need to have time to process. When I'm coaching people, I always do their color code first because then I know how I can communicate. I know whether or not I can look at them and go, "This is the dumbest thing you've ever done in your whole life." Or, "Well, let's think about this." I mean, it sounds, it's not disingenuous. It's speaking and being where they are. And I have to constantly be cognizant of that because brand is real. There is a woman here in Nashville I've been following for years, And that she just wrote a book. I can't wait to read it. But that is what she's all about, is what is your professional brand? And then I love that she always says, and you have to be authentic. So
I want to talk about so many things that you just talked about there, but let's go into authenticity, shall we? I want to talk about that, and then the fact that we can be perceived as having overstrengths. So let me talk about authenticity first, and then we'll get to overstrengths. A couple of years ago, Dale and I were working with a group not unlike this one here, and we were talking about authenticity and showing up at 100% with who you are. And it was really interesting because there was a woman of color who pushed back on that and said, as a woman of color working in a mostly male, white dominated industry, there's no way you're getting 100% of me. And I thought that is really interesting because I don't think that's actually what we meant. What we meant was the portion that we bring to the professional world, that portion should be authentic, but it's okay to hold back on certain parts of who we are, our families, or whatever. I wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
oh my goodness, yes. I mean, I think it's having situational awareness. I'm still working on that. I'm a work in progress, but situational awareness is real. And I think we absolutely have to have it. There are some of the folks on the call that work in a law firm. I work in a law firm. If you know anything about the social dynamics of a law firm, you have attorneys and you have staff, and that's just the real. And so being aware of this when you are interacting, if I go into an attorney's office, I start strictly business. I am there if they need help or we're talking about training or whatever it is. I start out very strictly business. Then I pick up on their cues as to what's next. So I keep it very the weather, if even that, and then I go further. There are some that really do get more personal. Just the other day, it was December. It was in December. I'm new to the firm. I was asked to go up and help a partner with a new application that we have. And I was showing him some things, super fun, friendly guy. And we discovered some common connections because of my previous firm. And the next thing you know, his wife calls. Well, he says, oh, I'm here talking to Kelly, one of our new trainers. She's helping me learn something. He was so excited about something I taught him. Well, that night was the holiday party. So my husband and I go, we're nervous. My husband is, again, he's in a cabinet shop all day. He's never around a computer. He's around a bunch of guys. And then I drag him to these law firm events where I still deal with a little imposter syndrome. Did I dress nice? Do I look appropriate? And then I'm worried about how he's dressed. And it's just goofy, y'all. I know I'm not the only one that goes through this. And so we're there. And the next thing I know, I hear across the way, hey, Kelly. And I turned around and it was that partner. And I went, uh-oh, okay, this is going to be a unique situation. And he called my husband and I over, introduced us to his wife, and we chatted for a few minutes. What I had to be aware of at that point was when to kind of step away and know that while this partner was being very friendly, very kind, this wasn't the time for all of us to be best friends. It was still a professional interaction. And so we chatted a little bit about Kevin, and then we chatted a little bit about this mutual connection. And then I said, you know what? I think I'm going to go get such and such. Can I get you anything? So nice to meet the wife, etc. Because I wanted it not to be a ultimate. And I think that's the challenge. And I'm not articulating this as cleanly as I want to. I think when you're coming from different backgrounds, it's knowing how to keep those professional boundaries, and then when and if to enter at a deeper level. And that can be hard if you're not schooled in some of that. Am I making sense? Does that make sense how I'm kind of presenting that?
Yeah, and what I'm thinking about is the when we find ourselves in multicultural situations, because that's going to have an impact on what's appropriate for those situations as well. Yeah.
Yes. I had the honor of being in a Toastmasters club that was very, very diverse. And over time, I started building relationships. And that's the other thing when we're thinking about the tougher subjects, the more sensitive subjects, is I think we have to start with a relationship first. And there were a few people that I called in 2020 and I said, I got to talk. You know me, you know who I am, you know what I'm about. I've got to ask some really hard questions, and I've got to ask some things that aren't politically correct so I understand. I would not have done that in a public forum. I would not have ever done that on social media. And I would not have done that had I not established time and a relationship with that person. And that resulted in a lot of learning for me and vice versa. So I do think it's that, years ago I worked with youth, and youth, if I may be so crude, they have an excellent BS meter. I mean, they just do. They know whether or not you're being authentic. I'm sorry for using that inappropriateness, but they just do. And I remember we had a phrase: you have to earn the right to be heard. They have to see you as who you are. They have to see you as a real person. And I get cracked up because there's a group of about, 5 or 7, 15, 16-year-old guys at church. And I mean, every time I walk in, they're like, Miss Kelly, how are you? And because they know I'm coming at it from an authentic way. And I absolutely am not interested in being anybody's mom. So I think it's that situational awareness. And again, I'm still working on that.
Yeah. I said there were two things I wanted to mention. The one was authenticity. The other thing is this idea of having overstrengths. So I mentioned the work that we do with executive presence, and the Suzanne Bates has broken presence down into what she calls 15 facets. And a facet is an attribute, right? A character attribute. And she talks about how we all have all 15 facets, but we shine in different ways. And so the idea is to find out, where do we naturally shine and where do we naturally not shine, and then try to lean into those strengths to polish the beautiful jewel that we are. But she also talks about we can have too much of every single one of these facets. Now, for me, I know this because I took a 360 assessment to become certified in these materials, but I have an overstrength in assertiveness. So I can come across as way too much, too opinionated, too strong from time to time. You just raised your hand based on some of the feedback that you've said that you've received. You and I probably share that. That's not to say that's a bad thing, but it is important to understand that there are situations, particularly in our field with learning and development, where we have to really pull back and let others have their say and let them take the lead from time to time.
That is so important. And I think that's where, knowing your superpowers and keeping them as your superpowers and not your impairment. It's kind of like feelings. A few years ago, a friend of mine, I saw Brene Brown was mentioned in the comments,
Yeah.
sent me a Brene Brown book. And I called her, and there was probably an expletive. Why did you send this to me? And she said, because of what you just said. And it was such a good tool for me. And that is one of those things that, I ended up taking a class, and I call it the feelings class, but it was about understanding your feelings. And I came up in an era where you just didn't really, that idea of bringing your whole self to work, it was a big no. There's so many different things that I'm encountering now. And in this feelings class, it talked about feelings are kind of neutral. They can have a benefit and an impairment. And I think our superpowers can do that for us as well. There is a benefit, Greg, in you and I having this, because we may be able to literally stand in for someone and speak up for someone when no one else can. That's a
Absolutely.
gift we have. The flip side of it is just what you just said, is being cognizant to know, hey, the quietest person in the room is often the one with some real depth of knowledge and nuggets that if you can get that person drawn out, you're going to be better. And so that's why even on my desk, I have a little plate that I had made off Etsy that says we are better together. Because I think if we start to combine our superpowers and be cognizant of them, that's where things get really good, because there are people that are more introspective. My husband provides phenomenal clarity. He and I can leave somewhere and I will be outraged. They were idiots. I can't believe, da 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 da. And somebody needs to tell them they were wrong. And he's like, it doesn't matter. I knew they were wrong. And, that's a gift. It's a real gift because he knows how to pick his battles. And so again, that's why I keep talking about we're better together, because it's understanding where your superpower is. And then also, where is that, not to get into the whole Marvel DC, because I never could, I'm not qualified, but where's your kryptonite? Because we all have it.
Yeah. Well, we need to wrap things up here. And so I'm going to share my screen. But while the computer is doing that, I want to acknowledge that Carrie said that she was just promoted into a new mentor role, and that this has really helped her. And she's going to change her approach, or will Yeah, I'm going to change how I'm going to approach the training. I think that is awesome. So thank you, Kelly, 1,000 times over for joining us for this session today. A couple of things, folks, before we close things out. If you are ready to take your team to the next level when it comes to communication skills, Kevin is going to drop a link to my calendar. I'm the sales guy around here, so I'm happy to have a conversation with you and see if there's some way that we can help you take your team to the next level. And also, we have some upcoming webinars in April. We are going to do the most popular one that we do, which is leadership communication in the virtual world on April 12th. And then on the 13th, we're going to talk about feedback without fear. That's that coaching thing that Kelly and I talked about just a moment ago. And I don't have a slide for this, but in May, Dina Emser, who is, I think, yeah, Dina, you're still here. You are our guest speaker in May, and I cannot wait to host you because you're going to be talking about empowering people by creating and sustaining a collaborative team. And that is something that's so important for moving business forward. So I'm really looking forward to that. And Dina, I know that you've got laryngitis today, so I won't ask you to say anything more about that. But anyway, thank you so much, folks, for joining us. Kevin is going to drop some more information into chat for you. If you want to stick around and download that stuff, that's great. We are also going to send you an email at some time today with all the resources that Kelly has mentioned. So once again, Kelly, thank you very much for joining us. If we could do a round of applause without it getting weird here in the virtual space, we would absolutely do that. But anyway, thank you, folks, so much for joining us today.
Thank you.